222. Hello everyone, I hope you're doing fine. My name is Skyline. I'm here with the duck. He's back. Come on. There he is. He's over here in the dog park. And today I have lots to talk about regarding 222. It's a pretty much unprecedented change as far as any competitive game goes, and it's going to change the shape of Overwatch and Overwatch's future forever. So we have to talk about it. Now, I know I'm not super as involved in the Overwatch community as I used to be, but considering I'm now like an outsider in a bit, I feel like I can give an unbiased opinion here while still being invested enough to have, followed the game and made videos for a year, right? All right, let's get into it. There are two things that I'm going to talk about, role lock and role queue, because they're a little bit different. Role queue is technically sort of a child of role lock, like a role lock's prerequisite, but they are two distinct things. So I'm going to talk about them differently. Let's start with role lock, and that's that each team can only have exactly 2 DPS, exactly 2 tanks, and they must have exactly 2 supports. A lot of the conversation I've seen has been really lacking nuance and really been very one-sided. A lot of people are like, oh, anti or pro, so I want to go over them both. I'm going to start with the pros of role lock. All right, so number 1, the first big pro is that you make the game more accessible. Yes, to new players, but also to just any players in general. An issue that Overwatch has now is that it's just really difficult to click that rank button for a lot of players. Not just new players, any players can have difficulty actually hitting the rank button because it's such an overwhelming experience to start a game of Overwatch. And I may be over exaggerating here a little bit, but to make the point that it's overwhelming to start a game of Overwatch, right? First, you don't know what map you're going to get. You don't know what mode you're going to get. You get in, and then you don't know what role you're going to play. You don't even know what team composition you're going to have. It's just very stressful. It's very loaded to click that button. I'm sure many of you who are watching this right now have experienced that before, where you're like, man, I just can't deal with this right now. I just can't click that rank button. Maybe I'll play quick play, but quick play is not fun. So maybe I just won't play Overwatch at all, right? Maybe I'll just chill. And that's what happens a lot, just because it's so stressful starting. It's just starting a game. All right, benefit number 2, it makes the game easier to balance long term. I'm gonna emphasize the long term here, and then I'll get back to the short term in a second. You probably know where I'm going with this, but it does make the game technically easier to balance because there's more constraints placed on the player, essentially. There's not as many factors. Similarly to how being able to stack heroes was just a balance nightmare because you go from combinations to permutations. It's just you literally multiply the number of possibilities by insanity, right? So this will help the Overwatch team balance the game better, which has been a bit of a struggle for sure. Whether it's their fault or not their fault, it's been a struggle. So making their lives easier is probably a good thing. The third pro is it enables role queue. Now I'll get into role queue in a little bit in more detail, but just in general, the concept of a role queue is pretty much accepted to be a good thing. Like, it was really good in League of Legends when they implemented it. It just makes it just a lot easier. But I'll be honest, that's kind of where the pros end, and I don't want to understate them because those are pretty big pros. So I don't want to underrepresent the pros. It's just that they're very simple to understand. And I'll get into that actually a little bit later into how that's really shaping the discussion. The pros are very, very easy to understand. I just laid them out. Those are the pros. Now I'm going to talk about the pros that people say are pros that may not be as much of a pro as you think. One is that it's going to make the game easier to balance in the short term, or that it's going to have some sort of positive short-term effect, at least on the meta. Sure, you're going to kill like triple tank or triple support or whatever, but it's going to be a lot of work. The Overwatch League team does not tend to balance on a very quick development cycle, and considering the game is going to be absolutely completely altered at this point, they're going to need really, really heavy cycles on these patches, because who knows what the balance is going to be. You could have a few heroes that are ridiculously overpowered or ridiculously underpowered. They're basically throwing everything out of whack. There is a balance patch that's coming out with 222, but they'll definitely have to do more from there. All right, looks like Doggo was getting a little tired out there, so we're gonna go back to the office for the rest, where we can bash on Jeff Kaplan a little bit. I'm just kidding. I love Jeff, but at the same time, he did say this in the developer update video.
I've heard people say that if we went to something like a 2-2-2 composition, we would be limiting the creativity of the game. And I couldn't disagree with this more. I feel like the most creative people work creatively within constraints.
So the idea that with limitation, you can enhance creativity. And likening this to 2-2-2, limiting the amount of compositions and heroes you can run will maybe perhaps blossom some sort of player composition renaissance or something. And so this I haven't actually heard in the community very much. This is sort of out of left field from Jeff, but at the same time, this is a really, really, really dire misuse of this concept. So I just really want to quick, even though it might be a tiny bit of a tangent, 1 minute, just give me 1 minute. 1 minute philosophy time, let's go, start the timer. All right, so the concept of limiting your options and enhancing your creativity does work in real life. Take the example of me making a song at my computer. The popular one is the 6-word story, but I'm gonna use this one. So me making a song on my computer, imagine all the sounds and music libraries I can use to create something. Try to imagine all of it. You can't. It's out of your comprehension. By thousands and millions of times, it's outside of the comprehension of your human brain to consider all the options that you have. Therefore, narrowing down the options, for example, let's say, oh, I can only use sounds around my house. That's probably still out of my comprehension of all the different sounds my house can make, but it's much more reasonable. Maybe that'll help me process it better, which is perhaps going to make me more creative. Usually it does. In the case of Overwatch, it's a closed artificial system that you can, if I were to ask you to imagine all the various team compositions in Overwatch, you could do it. You can actually write them down. It's well within your scope, right? So limiting your options in that case, when it's already within the scope of your the human brain, doesn't enhance creativity at all. In fact, all it does is cut it down. And that is all the time I will spend on that. Anyway, let's go on to that third and final pro that people think that is a pro but might not be so much a pro, and that's that it will fix the meta. So right now I think a lot of people are sick of GOATs for obvious reasons, sick of seeing the same thing forever, and I don't think that everyone thinks that this will fix the meta necessarily, but definitely I would not be shocked to get into a one comp meta again. Like, it's not going to make it necessarily better or reduce the chances of that happening. It's just going to make it so that whatever the one comp is, it's going to have 2 supports, 2 DPS, and 2 tanks. But like I said, I don't think that, I think a lot of people understand that this is possible. So we're going to move on to the cons. And here I'm going to talk about the spirit of the game. I talked about this in a recent video about what makes a great competitive game. You can go ahead and click on the iCard if you're interested in that, what makes a good esport. But the spirit of the game, why do people play Overwatch? What's sort of the selling point of Overwatch? What's the hook? I think it's been clear since launch that the real selling point of Overwatch has been unique characters, because they really sell the characters, right? They focus heavily on the identity of the characters. You can tell by the design. Each hero was designed to be incredibly unique and have incredible strengths. Bastion couldn't move, but his gun was just insanely OP when he did shoot it. Zenyatta, the glass cannon, insane damage, but he could also heal. But the downside was he only had 150 HP and he died to like a stiff wind. The Overwatch balance team since then has taken a very utilitarian approach to balancing heroes. A lot of heroes have been flattened out. The personalities have been significantly flattened out. Bastion's gun is way less strong and he's way more mobile, so he's become more like a normal character, right? Zenyatta went from glass cannon, they brought his HP up to normal, they brought his damage down, so now he's more like, he still does more damage than normal support, but they brought him more in line with the rest of the heroes. With the 2-2-2 role lock change, they've also announced that they'll be changing. So remember, because heroes are unique, they don't just fit neatly into these 3 nice little roles. So they've announced that they'll be taking heroes over the next, few months or whatever that don't exactly fit into roles and forcing them and changing them so that they can fit. I'm very worried that it's going to really suck a lot of the life out of the game, because all the heroes are going to be even more similar than they are now, because they, like I said, Blizzard's done a good job of making all the heroes very similar in terms of what their scope is, and they're going to push it even further. We've seen this mistake happen with League of Legends. League of Legends had this issue, so they also had a design issue where they had just a lot of humanoids, like a lot of cute girls and a lot of hot dudes, basically, as every champion. But they also had a mechanical issue for quite a while that the player base was vocal about. This is several years back, where all the champions were balanced so tightly together that it was everything was like did the same amount of damage and stunned for the same amount. And sure, ultimates, were a little bit different, but ultimates basically like stunned for a certain amount or did a certain amount of damage, or they were AoE, and like all the champions felt very flat and not very unique. And since then, League has reversed it and tried to make their heroes more unique. And I'm not saying to not balance your game, right? But you can either buff strengths and nerf weaknesses, which makes your hero more extreme and unique, or you can nerf their strengths and buff their weaknesses, which makes it more like flat, more the same as every other hero, right? And a second con, I'll just sort of extract it from that to make it maybe a bit more distinct, is that it will significantly limit team creativity, team creation creativity. So you could potentially have very stale metas with only one team composition, and it could be pretty difficult to balance out because there are less options to deal with broken stuff. So if something's really broken, you're like, well, I guess that's really broken. There's nothing I can do about it. And I already explained how the Shakespeare example that Jeff gave was a fallacy. It's not going to increase creativity. So I'll move on to role queue here in a second, but first I just want to really wrap up. Like I said, I was talking about the spirit of the game before, and maybe what I was saying was a bit ethereal, and not because it was like big brain, super IQ, just it's kind of hard to get on the same page about things that are feeling based or emotion based. And so much of a video game is in the feelings and the emotions of the player. And that's why a lot of the time I read every single comment on Reddit for all the top threads that have been going on over the past few weeks about 222. And I saw the same thing time and time again, where some individuals would argue for the pros, the positive things, and those are concrete, those are indisputable. A lot of the cons, like I said, because it has to deal with the feeling of the game, the design of the game, can't really be argued so objectively. So I would see someone be like, well, this is going to be lame because I like to, I like to play Lucio on some maps, but on other maps I play DPS a lot. But on this map I really like to play Reinhardt on that map, and this isn't going to let me do that. Or like, and I guess that's for role queue, so I'll skip that. But something like, hey, I think it's really cool to have 3 DPS, or I think it's really cool to be able to have more of a certain class, and I really like the creativity. A lot of the time you would get responses that were like, oh, so sad. I'm sorry you can't do that anymore. Like, good for you, who cares? Because you can't quantify it. Maybe someone thinks that that's important and another person doesn't, but that person might think another element of the game is important. I can't objectively argue that the ability to play 3 DPS or 3 supports or whatever is better for the game. I can't do that. All I can argue is the original design intent of the game and sort of the spirit of the game, and how something is not in line with that. Generally, if something is not in line with what people originally played the game for, it's really bad news. Gaming industry, never forget Artifact. Artifact is a card game that, for all intents and purposes, was technically, from a utilitarian standpoint, fine. It was good. It was great, in fact. From a monetization standpoint, it was the cheapest card game by far. You could play multiple meta decks with only like $50 or whatever, whereas in MTG Arena or Hearthstone, you need to spend hundreds of dollars. It was from a gameplay perspective, it had a ton of branching options. Compared to any other card game, you had a lot more options. You would always look back and there was never necessarily a clear solution. For all intents and purposes, like I said, just a very technically good game. The systems were perfect. It was integrated with Steam and the inventory and the marketplace and everything, the trading. It was all so good, so well put together, but no one kept playing it. The game died very quickly because it didn't have any soul, didn't have a feeling. Everything from the design to the art, to it just didn't come together. There was no cohesive spirit. It just didn't feel good to play. Like, I would play the game and I'd be like, this is a good game. And then someone would ask me if I had fun. I would say no, because it just didn't feel unique. The game had no spirit to it. It just felt cold and dead and overly utilitarian. Like someone had come in robotically and made everything like lined up, like all in a row, which was technically good, but not, just didn't hit anyone's heart or soul. On the same note, Magic the Gathering I think is a terrible game. I think it's an awful game. I think the mechanics are trash and I hate it. But at the same time, I will play that game because I might get mana screwed 5 games in a row and say this is dumb. Who designed this? This makes no sense. But it's really fun to play cards and tap cards, and all the art goes really well, and you feel like a wizard, and it's awesome. So I get mana screwed 5 games in a row, and I say, wow, that really sucked. This game sucks. I'll play another one, right? So I cannot overstate the importance when you see a player say something like, oh, you know, I like doing this, and this change will make it so that I can't do that anymore. Like, this is what I liked about this hero, and this change, you know, makes it so it's not as good. Really think about it. Try not to dismiss it. I know that it can be hard if you disagree, if you think like, oh, well, I don't like that aspect of the game. It can be hard to disagree, but every time you see that, that's another person who could potentially stop playing the game because, yes, even though it's technically better, you could argue, you could get your calculators and your graphs out and say, well, you see, actually, if you look at the stats, like, this is a superior option. Like, it doesn't matter. That's not what sells games. Feelings, or like, that's not what keeps games. Actually, you can sell games. Artifact sold a bunch of copies, but you can't keep players without that spirit, without that feeling. So do not downplay that. All right, I'm gonna get off my soapbox. Roll queue. Roll queue, so you can now queue up for either DPS or tank or support, obviously. And interestingly, they all have a different MMR. And oh, also for the overall, so there's the individual leaderboards for each role, and then the top main leaderboard. The overall leaderboard is decided by the average of your 3 MMRs for each role. Obviously, this helps a lot. Again, with the pressing that rank button, it can be a lot easier because you know exactly what you're getting into, right? I'm gonna just queue up for tank, or I'm just gonna queue up for support. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to like get into the game and wonder, you know, okay, well, what role am I gonna be playing? What's our team composition gonna be? I don't know, right? It's gonna be much easier to just go in because you're not going to have to worry about that hassle. Also, you can play the thing you want consistently. With roll queue, you can more consistently play the hero that you want to play each time, which is cool. Or at the very least, the role, right? Because just because you have 2 DPS heroes doesn't mean that those 2 DPS heroes are necessarily good. And I'll get into that in a second. So those were 2 very, very strong pros. Like roll queue is an excellent thing. For sure. That's the biggest pro, in my opinion, of 222 lock is roll queue because of how much easier it makes everything. But it's not as good as people think. Like, it's good, but let's be clear that there are a lot of things people are saying it'll do that it won't necessarily do. For example, the cure to toxicity. No. So people do not complain because they're like being rational or logical, right? People complain for fun. It makes them feel better to complain. If someone can't complain that you're playing the wrong role, they'll complain that you're playing the wrong hero, right? Oh, you know, you should be playing this different hero. If someone's not complaining about the hero, then they're complaining about how you're playing the hero. If they're not complaining about how you're playing the hero, they're complaining about something else. The toxicity will be exactly the same. Some specific breeds of toxicity, like DPS or AFK, might not be there, but I mean, like I said, those people are looking for a reason anyway. It might not be DPS or AFK, it might be Widowmaker or AFK. Let's say Widowmaker is the really strong flavor of the month. Like, oh, either I play Widowmaker or I'm AFK and the other DPS player plays Widowmaker. The second pro that people think is a pro that isn't necessarily going to be so much of a pro is that it will fix the team comp. Like, your team comp is always going to be pristine. Well, let's say you have 2 projectile DPS against a Fair Mercy and they don't switch. I mean, that's pretty bad, right? Or let's say you have 2 off tanks and no one wants to play a main tank, right? Or a main peeler. You can have some pretty troll support combos as well. So yes, it'll make it a bit more regular, like you aren't going to get 6 DPS crazy throw comps, but there's still gonna be issues. Like you're still gonna queue into a game and you're still gonna say, oh wow, my team sucks, like my team comp sucks. But it's a half pro, so I'll give that a half a point for a positive, not a full point. But let's get into the cons, and once again, these cons are not as objective as the pros. They're just feelings, right? So one example is, I brought the map example up before. Some people pick their heroes based on the map. Well, you can't do that anymore. Once you're queued up, you are locked in. You know, you're locked into whatever role you are. You'll also get some randomness in terms of, if we assume that if someone's going for the general leaderboard, they need to play all 3 roles already, right? So presumably they know all 3 roles, and nobody knows every hero for every role. So you could get unlucky. Like, let's say you are a really good McCree player, or you're just a really good hit scan player, and you queue as support this game. And you get matched with a bunch of projectile DPS players, and there's a Pharah Mercy on the other team, and you just know, like, if I could switch to Widowmaker, that Pharah would be dead. But you can't because of role queue, and it's kind of random because you know you have no way of knowing what sort of game you're queuing into for your role. This is also going to change the way people view the game also. Like I said, this is a radical change for a competitive game, something that's never been done before, and the separate MMRs in particular really take away from the concept of being a good Overwatch player and emphasize being a good support player, good DPS player, good tank player. Now, yes, there is the general leaderboard that is the average of all 3, but it's not really the same. Right now, being a good Overwatch player requires you to be flexible to a certain degree. You need to be able to fill in for a tank or fill in for a DPS or something if you're a support main in a matchmaking scenario, of course. You need to be able to make good strategic decisions. Sometimes the situation calls for just making a quick swap onto something, you know, filling in a role for someone real quick, switching to a tracer to deal with a backline that's just really sticky and can't be taken out. These are things that are all involved in being a good Overwatch player right now. That's going to fundamentally change because to be on the top leaderboard doesn't require you to be really flexible in the sense that you are right now. It just requires you to one-trick DPS to the top, and then one-trick tank to the top, and then one-trick support to the top, which is very different than doing all 3 of them sort of at the same time. And then, of course, we have the fact that DPS is going to take 5 hours to queue. Maybe they won't, I hope not, but, you know, DPS queues are going to be a bit rough. So the idea that, oh man, I'm a DPS player and I hate that I can never play DPS. Well, now you are guaranteed to play DPS, but you're probably going to have to wait for a little while. Like I said, up to... the patch isn't out yet, so we don't actually know how long the queue times will be. I know that was a specific concern stated by the devs. All right, so I said a lot of stuff. If you're still with me, what is the conclusion, right? Because I said a lot of good stuff. I said a lot of bad stuff. You might have noticed that I was emphasizing the bad stuff over the good stuff. That's mostly because, like I said, I just think that it's a really big ideological advantage the positives have because they're concrete, they're empirical. You can't argue them. Like, yes, that is real. All of the other stuff is feels, which you could just say, oh, well, your feelings are invalid. They don't go along with the rest of the player base, and no one has any empirical evidence to really prove otherwise. So what's my take on it? What's my final conclusion? I think that, like I said, from a utilitarian standpoint, it's perfectly fine, right? You can't argue against the utility of these changes. Role queue is amazing. 222 is going to provide the things that they want it to provide. However, this game has had a problem since the beginning where it's just getting flatter and flatter and colder, and the spirit of the game has just been patched out every single patch. And every single patch I see players quit for this reason, for feeling reasons. You know, you might play the game, you might queue up for a role queue, for example, and you'll play the game and be like, oh wow, that was a superior method of like playing ranked, or like that was technically a superior experience from the end user side. But there's a possibility that the charm might wear off. Maybe eventually you just be like, yeah, I just don't enjoy the game as much. I don't know why. I think that that's a real possibility. And you also have to ask, was it necessary? Because I think that, so something that isn't really disputable, I think, is how much this goes against, like I said, that original design intent, the original spirit of the game that made Overwatch so big, that made Overwatch what it was, right? The flexibility, the creativity, the individual characters. I think that there is very little disputing that this goes radically against that original intention. And if you do something like that, it better be really, really necessary. It better be the last possible thing you can do. And do I think that, so you obviously can't have role queue. So role queue is a big thing you miss. But as far as the meta stability and stuff. Like I said before, taking the meta example of the Overwatch League, stabilizing the careers of DPS players, like you can do that by just balancing the game correctly. It's not impossible. Now, obviously, there are professionals trying to balance the game. So if they've tried to balance the game for X amount of years, then maybe you can conclude that it is impossible there because we have a team of professionals working on it. But I mean, we had Mercy meta for 6 months. We had this meta for 5 decades with goats and such, variations of goats. Like, is it really impossible? I feel like it's not. I feel like there could have been less drastic measures made. In the short term, the benefits are very easy to see. In the long term, the downsides will be very difficult to see, and they'll be difficult to trace back to. I guess they'll be easy to trace back to this because this is such a big change, but normally they'd be pretty difficult to directly, empirically trace back to this. So overall, it's just a really concerning change. I don't doubt the functional advantages, don't doubt that, but I think that there is a huge risk being taken, a massive risk, and I don't know if the risk is worth it. So I guess this is more of a herald of warning, where it's like, have your festivals, have your feasts for now, or whatever. But there might come a day where this change really, really, really comes to bite Overwatch in the butt. And you really need to ask yourself, was it worth it? Was there another alternative, right? I'm very much in the middle on this. I always lean towards keeping the integrity of the game. So I will definitely lean towards not taking the change. But if I were sitting in a I've been in conversations with really, really high thinking individuals who are really pro 222. Who've spoken to me, and after every conversation, it's like, hey man, you're right, but also you're wrong, and it's really hard to tell. So I can't make a prediction. If I had to, if you were like, Tom, I'm gonna shoot you in the head if you don't make a prediction right now, hard prediction, I'm gonna say this is a bad change that will result in the game feeling overly cold to players and uninviting, just because it just lacks that depth and that feel. I feel like the heroes are going to be too flat. They're going to continue to balance the heroes to be continually flat, and the experience is going to continue to be even flatter and flatter. Overwatch League is going to be more of the same. People are going to get bored of it after a while. People are going to get bored of the game, and I think that is the future of Overwatch. I don't think that it's necessarily true, but hey, you put a gun to my head, so what am I supposed to do? I hope that doesn't happen, but I hope this brought more nuance to the conversation. At the end of the day, it's already done. It's not going to change. For those who are pro-utilitarian, please try to see the feeling-Z people's sides, and for those who are feeling-Z, it feels really bad, but also understand the utilitarian side and understand where they're coming from as well. That you can't get on the same page in feelings, but you can get on the same page as far as something objective, right? So, all right, I don't know how long this video is. I think it's super, super long. I think it's a really important issue, so hopefully it warrants it. Right now, in case you're wondering what I'm doing, I've been grinding Teamfight Tactics because that's the new greatest, biggest game. I'm going to be making a series about that. And it's sort of a way to demonstrate like how to climb and get better at a game. Last time I stopped, I was in the top 100, almost breaking top 50. So if you want to watch me, I'll be on Twitch. The link is down below. I stream pretty much every day, so come and check me out then. Otherwise, follow me on Twitter or join my Discord server because we have the best Discord server ever. I love everyone there. Never forget to stay positive and have a great day. See you next time.